Welcome back, book talk enthusiasts, to another exciting episode of Dragons and Spaceships, where we shine a spotlight on all the sci-fi and fantasy books that are taking the platform by a storm. I'm your host, Brandy, and today we are diving into a debut novel that has been making waves in the fantasy romance world, Assistant to the Villain by Hannah Nicole Mayer. This book is equal parts humor, adventure, and romance, and it's got one of the most unique backstories for a novel I've seen in a while. So if you are a fan of an unlikely hero story and you're ready for a fun twist on the villain narrative, stick around. But before we dive into this book, as always, let's take a look at the Realm and Galactic rankings and highlight a currently trending sci-fi or fantasy book. Today we are going to highlight The Narrows by Ronald Malfi. This is an atmospheric horror fantasy set in a small town overtaken by a supernatural flood. Strange and deadly creatures lurk in the floodwaters, and it's up to a group of survivors to figure out how to escape. This one's got a haunting vibe that keeps readers on the edge, ideal for fans of suspenseful, creepy fantasy. Go check this book out if that sounds fascinating to you, and let us know if you think we should cover this on the podcast. Okay, back to the Assistant to the Villain. Let's start with a little backstory, because Assistant to the Villain didn't just come out of nowhere. In fact, it all started on TikTok. Hannah Nicole Mayer, the author, began sharing these hilarious skits about a charmingly awkward assistant working for a villainous boss. The dynamic was pure comedy gold, with the assistant trying to keep up with her boss's demands while balancing her own chaotic energy. Fans went crazy for these videos, and it wasn't long before Mayer realized she had something special on her hands. The TikTok series quickly gained a huge following, with fans asking for more. And that's where the magic happened. Hannah turned these short sketches into a fully fledged book. Assistant to the Villain builds on the chemistry and the humor of her TikTok characters, but adds depth, backstory, and a fantasy world that pulls you right in. So what's the Assistant to the Villain all about? At the center of the story is Evie Sage, a young woman desperate for a job to support her family. She ends up in the most unexpected role, assistant to the kingdom's most feared villain. Picture an intimidating, powerful villain paired with an assistant who just keeps trying to keep her head above water. It's the classic grumpy sunshine trope, and it works so well here. Evie is resourceful, witty, and she doesn't take herself too seriously, which is perfect contrast to her boss's intense and brooding personality. Their relationship is one of the highlights of the book, with Evie bringing light and humor to the story and the villain showing glimpses of a softer side. The chemistry between them is fantastic. It's got tension, banter, and a slow burn romance that keeps you turning pages. What's great about the story is it's not just about romance or humor. There's also plenty of action, high stakes missions, and even a bit of mystery. You get to see Evie navigate this dangerous world, try to understand her boss's motives, and ultimately challenge her own perceptions of good versus evil. Assistant to the Villain has quickly gained popularity, and a lot of that has come from its blend of humor, romance, and fantasy adventure. The TikTok fan base followed Hannah to the book world, but Assistant to the Villain has also attracted readers who might have not known about her social media presence. The humor feels fresh and modern, and the story is accessible while still bringing depth, making it perfect for both fantasy and romance lovers. One of the reasons this book resonates so much is because of its relatability. We've all had a boss or authority figure that we've tried to keep up with, maybe feeling a little bit like Evie in a job that's way over our heads. But in Assistant to the Villain, this experience is amplified in a fantasy setting, making it all the more entertaining. So let's dive into some fun facts about Assistant to the Villain, because there's more to this book than meets the eye. Like I mentioned earlier, this story started as a series of TikTok skits, and fans loved the dynamic between the villain and this quirky assistant. The videos were so popular that they inspired the book, making it a unique social media to novel journey. This is Hannah Nicole Mayer's debut novel, which is incredible because what a strong start. Not many authors can say they built their fan base before even publishing their first book. This book has been called Once Upon a Time Meets The Office, and I think that's pretty spot on. It's got that whimsical fairy tale feel mixed with the quirky everyday humor you'd find in a modern workplace comedy. The success of this book has paved the way for more. There's already a sequel, Apprentice to the Villain, which released in August 2024, and it doesn't stop there. The third book, Accomplice to the Villain, is set to come out in September 2025. So if you're hooked on Evie and her boss's adventure, there's plenty more to look forward to. Why should Assistant to the Villain be on your reading list? If you're looking for a story that doesn't take itself too seriously, but still delivers on romance, fantasy, and adventure, this is it. The chemistry between Evie and her boss is pure gold, and the humor keeps the story light and engaging. You'll find yourself laughing out loud, swooning, and rooting for Evie as she finds her place in this chaotic, villainous world. And honestly, I think there's something refreshing about a story that doesn't try to make the villain a typical one-dimensional bad guy. Instead, Assistant to the Villain plays with the idea that maybe villains have their own reasons, their own pasts, and maybe even a side worth loving. Well, that wraps up today's episode on Assistant to the Villain. Hannah Nicole Mayer has created something truly special here. And with 2 more books in the series, it's perfect time to dive into this world if you haven't already. Apprentice to the Villain, the second book, takes Evie and her boss's story even further, adding more mystery, more romance, and more twists. And we even have Accomplice to the Villain coming in September 2025 to complete the series. If you're in the mood for something fun, adventurous, and romantic with a twist, I highly recommend picking up Assistant to the Villain. It's a delightful read with all the charm and humor you can hope for. Don't leave yet, though. Before we go today, we have our 2 other segments to go over. First, we have Dragon's Roar. In today's Dragon's Roar, we are diving into the latest drama or news in the book industry. Ava Reed shared her cover for the newest book, Fable for the End of the World, which comes out March 4th. It's beautiful, so go check it out. Next, we have the Sorcerer's Scrolls, where we look at some forthcoming fables and quests you can embark on soon. The Bloodstone Chronicles by Tasha Suri. Mark your calendars because coming in the spring of 2025, the Bloodstone Chronicles will be here. This is the beginning of a new series by the Jasmine Throne author Tasha Suri. Set in a world inspired by South Asian myth and folklore, the story follows a princess with forbidden powers and a curse that could destroy her kingdom. With lush prose, intricate world building, and morally complex characters, the series is poised to be another hit among fantasy readers. Keep this one on your radar. Well, that's it for today's episode. Thank you so much for tuning into Dragons and Spaceships. If you have read Assistant to the Villain, I'd love to hear what you think. Who's your favorite character, or what's your favorite moment? Drop a comment on our social media pages and let's keep the conversation going. And don't forget to subscribe for more book talk, reviews, and updates on upcoming releases. Until next time, happy reading, stay curious, and keep exploring the fantastical and the futuristic. And may your TBR pile never stop growing.